After a busier than expected month in July, we saw both homebuyers and home sellers easing off on their activity in the month of August. And in fact, we saw both the pace of sales and the pace of new listings having double-digit declines in the month of August. So what exactly is happening in our market and how is this impacting prices? I'm Adina with Adina YVR Vancouver Real Estate Group and Oakland Realty here with your September 2025 market update. While both the pace of sales and new listings saw double-digit declines in the month of August, if we pull back and look at a bigger picture, we can see that activity was actually up 3% relative to this time last year and closer in line to the 10-year historical average for the month of August. So overall, it seems like our market is moving towards stability. Let's take a deeper dive into the numbers and see exactly what's happening. In the month of August, we had almost 1,960 homes sold on the MLS in Greater Vancouver. While this represents a decrease of 14% relative to July, it's actually a 3% increase relative to this time last year. And relative to the 10-year sales average for the month of August, we're down 19%. While our home sales are still below the 10-year sales average for the month, what's important to note is a trend that we've been on in the last few months. In August, we were 19% below that 10-year average, but back in March, we were 37% below the 10-year average for that month. And what we've seen over the last few months is that gap has been narrowing. Looking at this by property type, we see that for detached homes, we had 575 home sales. This is an increase of 13% relative to August of last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, we had 409 sales, and this is an increase of 10.5% relative to this time last year. And for condo apartments, we had 956 homes sold in August, and this is a decrease of 5.5% relative to this time last year. Let's take a look at the supply side. In the month of August, we had just over 4,200 homes newly listed for sale on the MLS in Metro Vancouver. This represents a decrease of 25% relative to July, but it's up 3% relative to this time last year. And relative to the 10-year sales average for the month of August, we were just 1% above that, so very much in line with the seasonal trends. So where does this put us with total inventory levels? Well, in the month of August, we had just over 16,200 homes on the market in Metro Vancouver. This represents a decline of 5% relative to July, yet it's up 17% relative to this time last year. And relative to the 10-year sales average for the month of August, we're up 37%. And again, when we look at this, we want to look at the bigger trend and the dynamic of what's happening. So while we were still above the 10-year sales average for the month of August, we see that this gap has been narrowing the last few months. Back in July, we were 40% above the 10-year average, and back in April, we were 48% above the 10-year average. So the big question is, how is this impacting prices? And to understand this, we want to look at the sales to active listings ratio, which looks at the balance between our current demand and our current supply and shows us what trajectory prices are on. If you've been watching our videos, you know that this simply looks at the number of sales in a given month divided by the active listings left over at the end of that month. And when this ratio is below 12% for a sustained period of time, we see downward pressure on prices, whereas when this ratio is above 20% for a sustained period of time, we typically see upward pressure on prices. And anything in between, we typically see prices stabilize. In the month of August, our sales to active listings ratio declined to 12.4%. So this is down relative to July when we were at 13.8%, and it's actually down slightly from June when we were at 12.8% as well. So we're right on the cusp of a buyer's market and balanced market territory. Looking at this by property type, we see that this ratio has dropped across all property segments. For detached homes, the ratio is currently at 9.3%, which is down from 10.2% in July, and it remains in buyer's market territory. For attached townhomes and duplexes, the ratio is currently at 15.8%, which is down from 16.7% in July, and it remains in balanced market territory. And for condo apartments, the ratio is currently at 14%, which is down from 16% in July, and this remains also in balanced market territory. And if our market continues to remain on this trajectory, we can expect to see modest decreases continue in pricing. In the month of August, the HPI composite benchmark price for all property types was $1,150,400, and this is a decline of 1.3% relative to July, and it's down 3.8% relative to August last year. Looking at this by property type, we see that for detached homes, the HPI benchmark price is currently $1,950,300. This represents a decline of 1.2% relative to July, and a decline of 4.8% relative to August last year. For attached townhomes and duplexes, the HPI benchmark price is currently $1,079,600. This represents a decline of 1.8% relative to July, and it's a decline of 3.5% relative to August last year. And for condo apartments, the HPI composite benchmark price is currently $734,400. This represents a decrease of 1.8% relative to July, and it's a decline of 4.4% relative to August last year. With summer break now over, the kids back to school, and everyone returning to work, it's typically in September and October when we see an uptick in activity, and that's what really sets the pace for the rest of the year. So we're going to be watching the activity and the stats very closely in the month of September. If you're thinking of making a move this year or even early next year, now is the time to start planning and taking action so you can get ahead of the market. If you'd like to discuss your options, you can schedule a consultation by clicking the link below if you're watching this on YouTube, or you could click the link in my bio if you're watching this on Instagram. And in the meantime, to stay updated with what's happening in the market, be sure to hit subscribe here on YouTube or follow me on Instagram at adina.yvr. That's it for now. Have a great rest of the month, and I can't wait to see you in October.